Do I come out?
Gonna,
Yeah, you're a star.
yes.
There's a lot of models on this. You
That's
belong.
Lola's fave.
The models.
Yeah, but histology. Count me out.
All right,
Oh,
so
she
we're
did
just
not
going to start with the first one listed in your packet, which is the esophagus. So in the esophagus, you are going to start from the inside. So this would be the lumen right here. This is where the food travels through as it goes from your mouth to the stomach. And the esophagus is lined with stratified squamous epithelium. So if you zoom in, you can see a really nice layer of that epithelial tissue. Right below the epithelium, there is a layer of connective tissue known as the lamina propria. So you can see that right here. And then right below that is a layer of smooth muscle known as the muscularis mucosa. All three of those layers are considered the mucosa. All right, so the mucosa is a region, or you could say, or a layer, and within that layer, there's three tissue types: the epithelial tissue, the lamina propria, and the muscularis mucosa. Then, below the muscularis mucosa is another layer of connective tissue. Within this layer, you'll find blood vessels, and you can find some glands within it. And that's known as the submucosa. So that runs from the bottom of the muscularis mucosa all the way to the next layer of muscle. Also smooth muscle. This is known as the muscularis externa. And then at the very, so all this is muscle. At the very outside is a layer of loose connective tissue known as the adventitia. All right, so that's at the very outside of it. So it's usually broken into three layers: the mucosa, the submucosa, or four layers, sorry, the muscularis externa, and then the adventitia here. All right, the stomach.
Say that again. The
Yes.
regions in order is mucosa.
Mucosa, submucosa, muscularis externa, and the adventitia. Where the mucosa consists of the epithelial tissue, the lamina propria, and the muscularis mucosa. All right, stomach also is divided into the mucosa, the submucosa, and so on. So most of these intestinal or digestive structures have a mucosa, submucosa, and then an external muscular layer. So in this, the epithelial tissue is simple-columnar, and you can see it here and all this out here. Simple-columnar. And then there's some invaginations here. So as you look here and here, and over here, those invaginations are known as the gastric pits. All right, so they're just the invaginations into there. Actually, if I click on this, it took me to a really nice one, so let me click on it. There we go. So here, here, and here, those are the gastric pits. And they're just invaginations into the stomach lining. And then at the base of the pits are gastric glands. So down here, these are all gastric glands. And the gastric glands are what helps secrete hydrochloric acid and enzymes that are gonna help break down the food that's in your stomach. And then, at the very bottom of this, oops, oh, wrong thing. In here, so if you kind of look into the middle of these gastric pits, there's lamina propria, so connective tissue, kind of runs between the pits. And you can actually also see it if you look kind of up here a little bit closer. So in here, underneath the epithelial tissue. So all this is the lamina propria. And then, go back to the bottom here. There's a layer of smooth muscle, and this is the muscularis mucosa. So those three layers are the mucosa. So the simple columnar, the lamina propria, and the muscularis mucosa. So everything from, let me zoom out for you. Here up is the mucosa on it. The submucosa is right below the muscularis mucosa. So all of this connective tissue here is the submucosa. And right below the submucosa is another layer, a really large layer of smooth muscle, and that's the muscularis externa. And this muscle actually has a special name. I don't think it's on here. You don't need to know it yet. We'll talk about it in class. It's called the detrusor muscle, and it actually is what, never mind. I'm in the urinary system or in the stomach. I'm getting ahead of myself. Wrong organ. Take that back. This muscle is in two layers. That's where I went to go with this. You can see that this layer is longitudinal, if you look at which way the fibers are running, and this layer is circular. And they're opposite of each other because when they contract like this, and that causes the stomach contents to start to slosh around. And as they start to slosh around, hydrochloric acid in the stomach is able to break down the food better. And so they go to opposite directions to help that churn up the stomach contents. And then at the very bottom, you have all of this adipose and loose connective tissue, and that's known as the serosa. And then within there, you can also find some blood vessels and some nerves if you were to look closely.
What were the names of the ones that go vertical and horizontal?
They're called longitudinal and circular. So there's a circular layer, and then there's a longitudinal layer.
Oh.
All right, small intestine. So the small intestine itself is broken up into three regions. The region that's connected to the stomach is known as the duodenum, and then the duodenum becomes the jejunum, and then the jejunum becomes the ileum. So let's see here. So the duodenum is this one. It connects to, here's the stomach right here. So the duodenum's the first part here. And then the majority of this is the jejunum. And then the part that connects to the large intestine down here is the ileum. So they're just regions, so they're not divided on here. But the region that's closest to the stomach is the duodenum. The majority of the middle is the jejunum. And the region that's closest to the large intestine is the ileum. So you're going to look at all three regions. The first one is the duodenum. All right. So for this, you need to find the simple columnar epithelium. Again, that line's the lumen. The lumen's where the food's moving through. And so if you zoom in on the tissue here, you'll see that it's simple columnar. All this right here. This is maybe a little bit nicer over here, simple columnar. And then directly below, oh, in this one you'll see some goblet cells. See if I can find some nice ones. Ooh, too close. There. Oh, here. Let me go to this one. This one has nicer goblet cells. So when you're looking at the epithelial tissue, you'll find some cells in there that are clear colored. Those are the goblet cells because they secrete mucus so they don't uptake the dye, so then they look clear or kind of whitish on the slide because of that. I'm gonna go back to this one because it's closer to what we have, like what ours looks like. So in here, they're not as nicely shown, but if we the staining on this one's not as nice for those goblet cells. Here's kind of one right here. And here. So they appear kind of whitish when you look in there at them. I think our slides are slightly better than this one at showing those goblet cells when you're looking for them. Then, right underneath the epithelial tissue is the lamina propria. So here's some lamina propria here. And it extends down. You can follow it into, or all the way down here. And then each of these finger-like projections here are known as the villi. And at the very end of the villi, at the very edge are microvilli. So microvilli are like little finger-like projections. It's hard to see on here. It's this kind of edge here that looks kind of blurry. So those are little finger-like or little projections off the ends of those big villi. So these are called microvilli, and they're really important for absorption of nutrients when we're in the digestive system. And we also call these microvilli the brush border because they're like kind of like brush. So they move things around on it. And then between the villi are crypts. So this right here would be called a crypt. So in the stomach it's a gastric pit, in the intestine it is a crypt. And then the duodenum, what makes it unique from the other regions of the small intestine is it contains what are called duodenal glands. And those duodenal glands are located just below the villi. And so all this right here are those duodenal glands. The other two regions, the duodenum and the ileum, do not have those. So that's how you'll be able to find or identify that as the duodenum versus the other two regions themselves. So, in terms of region, yes.
So the hormone must be secreted by those glands is coming from the bile, from the gallbladder, is that right?
Not these ones. So the gallbladder secretes into a bile duct, which directly inserts it into the intestines. So there's a special like duct. These are going to secrete other enzymes that help break down food. And then they also secrete bicarbonate, and that helps to neutralize. So when the food comes from the stomach into the intestine, it's very acidic, right? Because it was just in hydrochloric acid. The intestines are a neutral environment. So to help protect the intestines from a really acidic material moving through them, it secretes bicarbonate, and bicarbonate helps neutralize that, what's now called chyme. Once it moves from your stomach to your intestines, it's called chyme. And it helps to neutralize that so it's not so acidic moving through the intestines.
The duodenal glands.
The duodenal glands, yeah.
Okay.
And then, if we talk layers like we've been, the mucosa would be from here to here, so that would include the simple columnar epithelium and the lamina propria. Once we get into the duodenal glands, that's considered the submucosa at that point. And then below the submucosa is a layer of smooth muscle known as the muscularis externa. There is a muscularis mucosa in here, but I don't see it very well. Let me zoom in. There we go. It's a very thin layer right here. So you kind of see it here. Really thin layer of smooth muscle, the muscularis mucosa. So that's right before we get to the duodenal glands. So I'll recap that one more time. So simple columnar, lamina propria, muscularis mucosa, all of that is the mucosa layer. Right below it becomes a submucosa, and in the submucosa are all of these duodenal glands. And then right below that is another layer of smooth muscle, and that's called the muscularis externa. And then right after that, and it's not on this slide very well, there's a little bit right here, is another layer of that loose connective tissue known as the serosa.
And then the villi is also the mucosa region?
The villi are part of the mucosa, yes.
Are goblet cells only found in the mucosa?
Yes, they're only found in the epithelial tissue.
The worksheet here says if we're still in the duodenum.
We're still in the duodenum.
The last sentence says, since most of the duodenum is retroperitoneal, the outermost layer is the adventina rather than the serosa.
Yes, so that's where it's located in the body. Let me come back to that in just a minute, once we go through the other ones.
But what you were identifying, the
Yes.
white of the beneath the smooth muscle
So yes, right below that right here is the
what you were
serosa.
calling the serosa.
Yes. Go through all these and then we'll come back. All right, so now we move from the duodenum into the jejunum. All right. So same mucosa, so it's still simple columnar epithelial tissue on the microvilli here, or sorry, villi here. And then inside of it is the lamina propria, so that connective tissue. And then as we follow down, the difference is there are no glands in this. So these look like glands, but these are still part of the microvilli up here. Can I open, oh, I could look at both at the same time. So just to compare side by side, see how after the dark purple, that's where the glands start? Here, if you look after the dark purple, there are no glands there. So there are no glands in this submucosa on this. And so that's how you're gonna be able to tell the difference between the duodenum and the jejunum and the ileum, is that submucosa does not have those glands. So then when we zoom in, the submucosa, so we get it close enough that we can kind of see. So this lighter layer right here would be the smooth muscle, so the muscularis mucosa. Then the darker layer right here, that's the submucosa right there. It's pretty thin. And then this layer right here is that muscularis externa. And then on the very outside, I don't feel like that one shows it very well. Does this one show it better? No, it hasn't. Down also. Oh, there's a little bit up there. So similar, here's this connective tissue out here, and this one is the serosa out here. All right, and then the last component of the small intestine is the ileum. So we'll find on the ileum that it still is made up of simple columnar when we look at it. And this slide's really bad, it's blurry for some reason. Inside here, the lamina propria. Again, when we get down here to the submucosa, there are no glands, like the duodenum. However, you will be able to find what are called Peyer's patches, which are large regions of lymph tissue. Remember, lymph tissue appears as dark purple when you're looking in there. And so that's how you're going to be able to tell that it's the ileum, because if there are Peyer's patches, then you're in the ileum. And then we still have the layer of slide's not great when I'm trying to show it, but it's better in this one. Yeah. So then we have the muscularis mucosa right here. Here's the submucosa, the muscularis externa, and then the serosa down here. And let me find a Peyer's patch in this one so you can see it. There it is, there's one right there. So a big purple structure within, up near the mucosa, are the lymph nodules or the Peyer's patches. And actually on our slides, these are really noticeable. Like there's a whole bunch of it in the slides. So when you have to be able to tell the difference between each region, remember, it's kind of like an elimination thing more like that, okay? So am I looking at duodenum? Well, yes, because it has duodenal glands. Am I looking at an ileum? Yes, because it has lymph tissue. If it doesn't have either of those, then you're looking at the jejunum. So you can kind of narrow it down based on those structures there. Other than that, everything else is the same. It has the same epithelial tissue, lamina propria, same muscularis mucosa and externa. So that's how you're going to be able to tell the differences in those. All right, that leads us to the salivary glands. So lots of histology today. Last time, let's see, where did I click to find that? There we go. Let's just have it perfect. There we go. That's a good picture. Okay, so when we're looking in the salivary gland, these clusters of cells are known as acini. And there's two types of acini within the salivary gland. There's what's called the serous acini. These produce enzymes, and they're the darker ones. So see all these kind of darker clusters around here? Those are all the serous acini. They make proteins. Because they're full of proteins, they stain darker because of that. The other ones are known as the mucus acini, so these ones right here. And that's because they secrete mucus, so they're full of mucus and they don't take the dye as well. So then they appear lighter within the stained histology. So serous, mucus are the difference between those two. And then, because it's an exocrine gland, which means we need to release it to the surface of that gland, in this example, into the mouth. That's where we're going. This is saliva. We're going to find ducts. So here are those ducts. Ducts are usually made up of cuboidal cells. So anytime you see cuboidal cells, then you're looking at a duct. So here's a duct, here's a duct, here's some more ducts. And then they're usually right next to some blood vessels, which, remember, blood vessels are simple squamous, so you can tell the difference between the duct and the blood vessel by looking at the epithelial tissue between those two. All right. Pancreas should be a review from 241 because you looked at this for endocrine, but it's also a digestive organ. So as far as the digestive structures, the acinar cells are all in the darker region. So if you remember, this lighter circle right here would be a pancreatic islet. So this piece right here. All of the dark areas around it, so all these other cells, are the acinine or the acinar cells, and that's the digestive function. They make enzymes that are going to be secreted into the intestine to break down the food. So let me zoom back just so you can see it a little better. So see this lighter region, pancreatic islet, that's the endocrine that secretes insulin and glucagon. All the darker cells around it, basically everywhere else, are acinar cells, and they secrete enzymes. And then it also wants you to find some ducts. I know these are ducts because they have simple cuboidal surrounding them. And then if I try to find a blood vessel, here's a blood vessel, simple squamous epithelial tissue around it. So you should be able to find both of those in there. And then the next one's the liver. So the liver is broken up into lobules. So you can kind of see these hexagonal shapes within here. Each of those shapes is a lobule of the liver. And the lobule is made up of hepatocytes. So if I zoom way in here, see all the cells, those are hepatocytes. And in between those cells, you can see some white structures, and those are sinusoids. Remember, sinusoids are really leaky capillaries because inside the liver, we need to get plasma proteins into the bloodstream. So the whiter areas are the sinusoids, and all the really dark nuclei are the hepatocytes. And then in the middle, this one has two, but usually there's just one central vein right in the middle of the lobule. So if I zoom out a little, central vein, central vein, central vein, central vein. So these kind of bigger openings are the central veins. And they're going to carry the blood out of the liver and head towards the hepatic veins. And then you also need to identify what's called the portal triad. See if I can find a nice one to look at. Let me click on it because it took me to a really nice one last time. Which was not that one. But to the really nice one that it took me to. Well. Okay, let me go, just trying to find one we can nicely see everything. This one's not too bad. So if you go to the corners of the lobules, there will be these portal triads, all right? And sometimes they look nicer than other times. But a portal triad includes the hepatic artery that's bringing the blood into the liver. So here we have a hepatic artery. It contains the hepatic vein, or the hepatic portal vein that we talked about, which is this right here. And then it also contains the bile duct. It's a duct, so that one has simple cuboidal cells. I want to go back to this one here because it has a nicer portal triad for you to see. Yeah, here. Ours, I think we have a couple of slides that are stained nicely like this where there's more color differentiation, but most of ours look like the other one that we were just looking at. So here, the portal triad's a lot nicer. We can see the duct right here. It's a duct because it has simple cuboidal. Artery. another artery, and then some veins. Remember, veins collapse on themselves, so because they have a thinner wall.
And where's the portal?
The whole thing's the portal triad.
Oh, okay.
It's called the portal triad because three things are connected all together right there. The hepatic artery, the hepatic portal vein, and the bile duct are all in that region. And then between, I'm going to go back to this one because this is more what we have. Each lobule is separated from each other with a interlobular septum, and that's made up of connective tissue. So if you zoom way in, you can see the connective tissue running between those different lobules, and that's what separates each lobule from the other lobules. All right, the tooth, there's not a tooth on histology guide. And I was having trouble finding one last time that gave us a good picture of a tooth. I had one and apparently it closed down on it, so let's see here.
That's not good.
Keep that one and then we'll also do. All right, so when we're looking at the tooth, you're first going to identify the crown from the root. The crown is the part that's the top of the tooth that sticks out of your gums, and then the root is the part at the bottom that's actually embedded in your gums. Right, so when you're looking at this one, the crown is up here because here is the gums and the bone down here. There's a darker region on the very outside. Oh, that's annoying that it has those. That's called the enamel. So it's darker and it runs more on the outer side. And just below the enamel, it's a slight change of color. So you can see it over here. See how there's a color change from here to here? This becomes the dentin right here. And then right in the middle, right here, this is known as the pulp of the tooth. And then you'll be able to see the paradental ligament. That's this kind of tissue right here. And it runs all the way around the bottom half of the tooth. All right, so all this tissue right here would be the periodontal ligament. The cementum is at the very bottom at the root, and it's kind of a darker color towards the very bottom. And when you're looking really closely, here you'll find the bone, the jawbone, and you'll be able to see osteons as the tissue histology of bone. All right, so that's kind of what you're looking at for the tooth.
And osteons are the ones that look kind of like a tree.
They're the circular ones with the rings.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's see. So again, enamel kind of out here, there's a slight change in color and it becomes the dentin. This right here would be the pulp. All this out here, that's the periodontal ligament. Right outside the periodontal ligament is the bone. And then it's hard to see on this one, there's a really small color change towards the bottom right here, and that's the cementum.
So when you have periodontal disease, what happens? Like, there's stuff that gets into the periodontal ligament?
Yeah, it gets down towards the bottom in there and starts to cause decay down there. Yes.
How do we know what tooth is what?
So for the histology, you don't have to be able to identify the teeth. So you don't need to know that it's a canine or a molar. However, you can kind of tell because canines are pointed and the molars and the incisors are flat on top. if I remember right, most of ours are canines because they have a pointed top. But in the histology, you don't need to be able to tell apart. You do have to be able to tell them apart on the skull models. So you can be asked, like, what is this tooth on a skull model? And you need to know if it's a canine, premolar, molar sort of thing. Okay?
And the enamel is on the crown?
The enamel is on the crown, and it does go down. It kind of wraps around the tooth right here. That kind of outer layer. Let's see. Yeah, so see, you can kind of, this one's a little bit better picture in showing it, right? All that, and then that there's a line there divides it from the dentin itself. And ours look like this right here with really nice coloring, so you're able to see the differences fairly easily. Yes.
Does the enamel go all the way to the root?
So it gets a lot thinner as it starts to spread down. You can kind of follow it down. It's much thicker on the crown of the tooth. All right, any questions on the histology? So I laid out all the slides over here. We only have 3 tooth slides, so make sure we're sharing those because there's only 3 good ones. We had 4, but one of them was not very good, so I took it out of there. I will let you know that the intestinal slides, let's see, what do we have over